In less than 48 hours, a retired couple lost their entire life savings, not to a hacker, not to a stranger, but to a man they trusted completely. That detail is what makes this story different, and it is what makes it dangerous. Because nothing about what happened to John and Linda Mercer looked like a scam while it was happening. It looked like a normal real estate transaction, handled carefully, step by step, exactly the way it is supposed to be done. John Mercer was the kind of man who believed in process. For over 4 decades, he worked as an electrical supervisor in Ohio, where mistakes were not just inconvenient, they were dangerous. He built his life around checking things twice, documenting everything, and never making assumptions. His wife Linda was just as careful in her own way. She had spent years as a school administrator, managing schedules, budgets, and people. Together, they had built a life that was stable, predictable, and financially secure. They did not take risks, they avoided them. Retirement was not a sudden decision for them, it was something they had planned for years. By early 2022, they had sold their home in Ohio at a strong price, giving them enough savings to relocate comfortably. Florida had always been part of the plan, not for luxury, not for status, but for a quieter life. They wanted warm weather, a manageable home, and a routine that felt slower and more peaceful. They had time, they had money, and most importantly, they had patience. They were not in a rush to buy anything. That is why what happened next unfolded the way it did. On a Thursday evening, Linda was browsing property listings online, just as she had been doing for weeks. She approached it like a project. She compared neighborhoods, tracked prices, and made notes on everything. She had already ruled out several areas and was narrowing down her options. That is when she found the house. It was located near Sarasota, in a quiet neighborhood that fit everything they were looking for. The house itself was simple but appealing. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, recently updated, clean and well-maintained. The photos looked professional but not overly staged. The price was $385,000. That was what made her pause. It was not so low that it looked fake, but it was low enough to feel like a rare opportunity. Homes in that area were selling quickly, often above asking price. This one sat just below what they expected. It created a question, not suspicion, but curiosity. She called John into the room and showed him the listing. He did what he always did. He did not react emotionally. He studied it. He looked through every image carefully, zooming in on details most people would ignore. He checked for inconsistencies, signs of poor editing, anything that might suggest something was off. After several minutes, he asked the only question that mattered to him. What's wrong with it? Linda didn't have an answer. That moment when they could not identify a clear problem was the point where the situation began to move forward. The listing included an agent named Daniel Reeves. There was a phone number, an email address, and a link to a professional website. Before contacting anyone, John checked everything. The website looked legitimate. It had multiple listings, agent profiles, and written content about the local housing market. Daniel's profile included a clean headshot and several positive reviews. Nothing stood out as unusual. Linda sent an email that evening, expecting a response the next day. Instead, Daniel replied within minutes. His response was polite, clear, and structured in a way that felt professional. He mentioned that the property had already generated interest and that several inquiries had come in recently. He offered to schedule a virtual tour the following morning. The speed of his response did not feel suspicious, it felt efficient. The virtual tour took place on Friday morning. Daniel appeared on video exactly as expected. He matched the photo on the website. He spoke calmly, confidently, and without hesitation. He walked through the property, showing each room in a way that felt natural and unscripted. The lighting shifted as he moved, and the small imperfections in the space made it feel real. Nothing about the presentation felt staged. He answered every question they asked. He knew the details of the home, the neighborhood, and the surrounding area. He explained recent renovations, property taxes, and even small details about nearby amenities. There were no pauses, no moments of uncertainty. At the end of the call, he said something that would shape everything that followed. He explained that there was strong interest in the property and that another buyer was expected to submit an offer soon. He said he wanted to be transparent so they wouldn't miss out. It did not feel like pressure. It felt like information. After the call, John and Linda talked about it for over an hour. They reviewed the details, discussed their options, and considered the risks. Nothing about the situation felt wrong. The only unusual factor was how quickly they needed to decide. By Friday afternoon, they made a decision. They wanted the house. That decision marked the beginning of the 48-hour window that would ultimately cost them everything. Daniel sent over the initial paperwork later that day. The documents were detailed, structured, and consistent with what they expected. There were no obvious errors. The language was formal and aligned with standard real estate agreements. John reviewed everything carefully. He did not rush. He read each section, making sure it made sense. Saturday morning, Daniel followed up. He remained consistent in his communication. He was available, responsive, and calm. He explained that the next step was to secure the property with a deposit. This was not unusual. In a competitive market, this was standard practice. He did not frame it as pressure. He framed it as a way to protect their opportunity. That distinction mattered. By Saturday afternoon, they had agreed to move forward. Sunday was spent preparing. They reviewed their finances, confirmed details, and went through the documents again. John searched for the brokerage listed on Daniel's website. It existed. It had a real office, real listings, and a legitimate presence. He called the office but didn't reach anyone. He assumed it was because it was the weekend. There was no reason to doubt anything. Monday morning, the wiring instructions arrived. They were formatted professionally and included all the expected details. The account name matched the brokerage. The bank was recognizable. There were no inconsistencies that stood out. John and Linda reviewed the instructions together. They did not rush. They discussed it carefully. They believed they had verified everything they needed to verify. At 11:42 p.m., they went to their bank and authorized a wire transfer of $120,000. The transaction was completed without issue. At 12:08 p.m., Daniel sent a confirmation email stating that the funds had been received and that the next steps would follow. Everything felt complete. Tuesday passed without updates. That did not immediately concern them. Real estate transactions often involve delays. Wednesday passed, and Linda sent a follow-up email. There was no response. On Thursday, she called. The call went to voicemail. She tried again later with the same result. By Friday morning, the situation had changed. Silence replaced communication. John decided to contact the brokerage directly. This time, someone answered. He asked for Daniel Reeves. There was a pause before the response came. There was no agent by that name. In that moment, everything they believed to be real began to collapse. The website, the calls, the documents, the confirmations, none of it held up anymore. John tried to explain, but the response didn't change. The person they had been working with did not exist. They contacted their bank immediately. A recall request was initiated, but wire transfers move quickly. By the time action was taken, the money had already been moved through multiple accounts. It was no longer recoverable. Investigators later explained how the scam worked. The listing had been copied from a previously sold property. The photos were real but reused. The website had been cloned from a legitimate brokerage. The video tour had been prepared in advance and presented as live. The emails were carefully constructed to appear authentic. Every step of the process was designed to remove doubt. John and Linda did not make a reckless decision. They made a series of reasonable decisions, each one supported by what appeared to be legitimate information. The timeline was tight but not suspicious. The communication was consistent. The details were convincing. That is what made it effective. The money was never recovered. Their plans changed. Retirement was delayed. They adjusted their expectations and focused on rebuilding what they could. But the financial loss was only part of the impact. The deeper loss was trust. Because in less than 48 hours, they did not just lose money. They lost certainty in their ability to tell what is real and what is not. And that's what makes this kind of scam so dangerous. It doesn't rely on carelessness. It relies on belief.